Okay.
All right. Good morning, Doug. We have a lot to talk about today in light of yesterday's events in DC. I just want to start off by doing a brief recap of as objective as I can of what actually happened, because I think there's a lot of confusion. People look at it as something that was broadly violent. Essentially, there was a mostly peaceful protest of Trump supporters who broke into the Capitol building. There's debate about who actually broke the windows, whether, certainly was more extreme people, whether they were on, where it was Antifa sort of snuck in, or whether they were on the right. I don't think it really matters, but these are the more extreme elements, broke the windows. And, crowds are weird. Crowds follow crowds. So when people have a reason to be, people are pissed. So anyway, they go into the Capitol building um, while they were having the electoral college vote for Biden. Now, the initial layers of security used all non-lethal methods. All the Capitol Police, like, actually, you see them using a lot of restraint, which is good, I think. Those basic levels of security seemed to mostly work. They couldn't keep them out of the Capitol building, but it didn't. It did keep the bulk of the people making it to the end. And you see video, for instance, of some of the protesters carrying Trump and American flags, walking through the Capitol building on the carpet between the velvet ropes, as if they were there for a tourist visit, just looking around. Of course, there are the videos of the idiots who are walking off at a podium and stuff like that. But you also see the contrasting. Now, these people who really look like they're tourists, really just never expected to be in that building and are just kind of checking it out. Some of the more aggressive folks pushed back through continuing layers of security up till they got to the last point where essentially, some of the congressmen were sort of, and women were held up, and like within the well of Congress itself. And some of them were justifiably concerned for their lives. Now, first of all, it's weird that a leader would be so concerned for their life if they had been serving their people well. But nonetheless, the final layer of security, though, these are the guys who are personal protection detail for the congressmen. So these people are, their job is to make sure that no harm comes to them. So the final layer of security to keep people out, these guys all had their guns drawn. They were prepared to use lethal force. A young lady, started to climb through the glass window of a barricaded door and was shot and killed. And that's basically what happened. That's what happened yesterday. So, Doug, what are your thoughts?
It may be too early to know, but Vladimir Ilyich Lenin had an appropriate quote for this. And of course, it's strange how all these communist, criminals, dictators, ideologues, are often very quotable. And Lenin said there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are days when decades happen, or words to that effect. And he's absolutely right. I'm increasingly convinced that we're at a major turning point in American and actually world history. The spirit of the century is rearing its head up, and it ain't pretty. No, this is the beginning of something big. We've just seen the overture so far. That's what I think. And my reasoning is, it's simple enough. I mean, it's that we're definitely going to head into a financial storm with a major market meltdown, chaos in the financial markets. A lot of people that shouldn't be in the markets are going to lose everything they have. Okay. And the economic disaster, which is, Main Street as opposed to Wall Street now we're talking, I think it's absolutely going to get worse. There actually is such a thing as the business cycle, and all this money they're creating, they're throwing at the economy, not just here, but everywhere. It's creating huge distortions. So this depression is going to be much worse and different and longer lasting than what happened from 29 to 46, which, I really think that the Republican Party is going to break into two, because you're either at things are, or you're like a country club Republican or something like that. They don't have much in common anymore. And the Democrats are more, AOC and the squad really are. So the Dems could break up. Then you got the social problems. No, this is across the board. So my prediction for the rest of this decade, forget about the rest of this year, which is going to be not good, is chaotic.
Yeah, I think you're right. Chaos is coming. So I agree with you. It does seem like chaos isn't raining yet, but it's about to. And I think that most of the conversation I've heard about this, what happened yesterday, is broad condemnation from almost everybody that is violence is never the answer, and that they went way too far yesterday. That they went way too far, and protesters, I mean. And I have to say, the only actual violence I saw was
they didn't go nearly. It was really, really steel, which incidentally is kind of overrated, because there were only about 2 or 3 prisoners in the Bastille, and it was easy to storm. Yeah, okay, I'll start from the beginning. It's like the storming the Bastille, but actually the Bastille was much easier to storm because there were only a couple or 3 prisoners in the Bastille right back, and the storming the Capitol actually was in some ways a bigger deal than the storming the Bastille. I think it's the match that started the fire. But anyway, it seems to me that the Republican Party is a sure thing to Trumpers and people that are really unhappy with the way things are going, that don't have much in common with the kind of Republicans that get elected to the Congress, with the exception of that lady from Rifle, Colorado, just down the street from us, kind of. Yep. That packs when she's, yeah, okay. But there's a definite bifurcation in the Republican Party. It can't last. It's going to fall apart. And the same may be true, although to a lesser extent, with the Democratic Party, because Democrats are all collectivists and they're all statists. But some of her pals have gone too far. So we're going to have a real political upset in this country that's going to continue.
That seems like it seems like the whole table is being reset on the political side of things. And, it's hard to say. One of the things I think is really positive for the conservative side of this is that, we've been distracted by these ideas, or conservatives have been distracted by the idea that, Trump was going to save us at some point. The whole Q movement was all about, just trust the plan, delay being upset, like just let it go. It's all going to be fine. It's daddy's taking care of us. And, now that that's been pulled out, it's just so obviously true now that that's not happening. Then people, I think that frees people up, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. But I think ultimately, I believe in individuals acting is probably more responsible than waiting to be saved, certainly. And now that people don't know that they have to save themselves, or at least that's the conclusion I think that they should have from this, that I think they're more likely to get way more active.
Yeah, well, back in the days when I was saying this type of thing, I was giving at least 5 reasons why people shouldn't vote. And of course, that's when the crowd really got restive, when I was on the Donahue show back in 1980. And I didn't get as far as the last one, which is your vote doesn't count. And I think it's actually a fact. People can see that their vote actually doesn't count, or it may or may not count, or it doesn't make any difference really whether they count your vote or not. Once again, referring back to Stalin for the bon mot, he said, hey, it doesn't matter who votes. What matters is who counts the votes. So he was absolutely correct. And I think a lot of average Americans are starting to see this now. So no, listen, once the financial and economic parts of this get underway, the political parts underway, I just wonder whether the Trumpers are going to get violent the way the Antifas were. Conservatives tend not to do that. They've got slow fuses and they don't believe in destroying property and rioting. That's part of being a conservative. And it's all about cultural conservatism, Trump. But no, it could actually get out of control, I think.
I felt that way for a long time when we'd see the stuff with Black Lives Matter and Antifa over the summer, and talking about how they were blaming it on white people and white radicals, and I said, the terrible thing about all this is that if you actually get the conservatives, the people that you consider on the right, you actually get them engaged and moving toward violence, it will get bad very quick, because these people they're capable. I mean, a lot of ex-military people who are very capable people, so they're very well armed, and they're serious. Like they don't know how to play these. They don't know how to play act these games. They don't know about the performative part of protests. If they come out, they won't know what to do besides actually real violence. So it is. You don't want these people off the sidelines, really. Like, things can totally go out of control very quickly if they do. But it seems like eventually they get pushed to the limit. And I think that's some of what we saw yesterday, because people are like, there's no excuse for this. There's no excuse for this. Even the conservatives, there's no excuse. Well, I mean, just to go through a couple points about what these people have had to deal with. Life for normal people in America has gotten harder and worse for a long time. A long time. This is not new. It's not just in the last year. It's not because of Trump. We can go back decades and look at the standard of living for the average person in the middle class has declined substantially over the last decades. And then Trump comes along and he's a good salesman, and people think they have their champion all of a sudden. He is genuinely unfairly targeted by the deep state. He's totally unfairly, but he lacks the competence or the desire to effectively defend himself. He keeps people working for him who he should fire, so he doesn't stand up for himself. And then we have these lockdowns. People lose their income and liberty, and then finally, the last thing to me that put the cherry on top was the stimulus bill, which was just to tell people to go fuck off. We really don't care about you. Why aren't you getting the message? We hate you. That's what they're trying to tell us, and they didn't get it. And so, and I heard this, this Congressman Dan Crenshaw, the SEAL who has the eye patch, I don't know if you
Yeah.
at all.
I try not to pay too much attention to these creatures, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's smart not to, but I just saw him saying something yesterday, and it was he's a Republican, and it's just enraging to me, because he goes, I see these people storming the Capitol building carrying an American flag. I don't know who the hell they think they are. I stormed enemy positions with a U.S. flag on my arm patch. Like, I stormed the enemy. Who are you storming? And I'm like, well, Congress makes people feel like Congress is the enemy. I mean, when this bill, like, really, like, it's like, it feels like they're not working for you when they do that. So, and I love it. I like the idea. I do think that a government should be afraid of those rules. I mean, it just keeps people honest. It seems like you should have that.
Well, I don't think they're very afraid, frankly, because maybe half the country and most of the young people certainly are woke or SJW. Mentioned this on air, or was that when we were talking before or after, that some relative or young friend of his was working, or other people saying, white people, I presume, that said, I hate white people.
Yes. Yeah, I was offline. He said that.
I mean, this is, yeah, it's really gotten completely out of control at this point. So, and it's just going to start because is what happened so far where some Bostonians were throwing snowballs at a half a dozen British soldiers, and then it got more raucous, and one thing led to another. The Brits fired into the crowd, and that became one of the cause célèbres behind the Revolutionary War, which incidentally was not just a Revolutionary War, but was also a civil war, because about a third of the people in the country wanted to remain with Britain, and a third wanted to leave, and a third didn't care. So it was a real witch's brew. It wasn't nearly as simple as it's usually presented. But yeah, this could happen again, despite the fact that most Americans now are living in basements of their mothers if they're young and doing nothing but playing video games and unemployed. Yeah, it could happen just like it happened in 1776. Sure.
One of the interesting things about this event is, I think, the propagandists during the Revolutionary War on the American side were much better than they are today. It seems like the propagandists, the media is really controlled by the other side, and spinning this as universally as like a bridge too far for these Trumpers, that they're dangerous. And I heard Biden invoke, when Biden came out and he calls it an insurrection, like no pulling punches, went right all the way to the very end of the line. The worst thing you could call them is, call it is an insurrection, and which sort of under that basis gives the government a lot of power to respond.
It does. It's not like what was happening in Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and Kenosha and some other cities. It's not like that was an insurrection, but this is an insurrection.
Exactly.
And, I wonder, listen, here's something that's wildly speculative. It's that perhaps, since the Trumpers tend to wrap themselves in the American flag, perhaps the American flag itself, this is outrageous to even think this. People think it's a crazy thought. But perhaps, since the Trumpers are wrapping themselves in the American flag, maybe that delegitimizes the American flag itself to the wokesters and the people in power and the deep state. And maybe that will evidence itself subtly at first, but who knows? They could, look, if they change the Constitution, which they very well may. I mean, there's been talk of a new constitutional convention for many years, and perhaps they'll do that and change things once and for all. Because now that they've got control of the state, they're not going to let go of it, because these are exactly the same personality types that took over Russia in 1917. They're exactly the same personality types that took over France in 1789. So it could happen here. Sure, it could.
It's interesting. The flag thing is a really interesting thing because you're right. I mean, where it's been unsafe for somebody in your neighborhood, if you were a Trump supporter, and a lot of, certainly in Denver, to put up a Trump sign because, it's a liberal city. But the substitute for that was you put up an American flag, and everybody knew what you were saying, but there was like the plausible deniability, that would keep the Antifa people from attacking it, just because there's some level of plausible deniability. So people were fly the American flag high. So the American flag is the flag of the rebellion, essentially, or of the out group. And it only makes sense that ultimately there's going to have to be a new flag. There has to be some new representation that won't be what we've been using historically. I mean, and the American flag will be like, like derided like the Confederate flag is.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, it seems like I don't see how you avoid that, because the people consider themselves patriots really they don't want another flag. Like that is their flag, and the other people don't like it already. Like it's meaningless to them anyway.
Well, more evidence that we're on the cusp of either a serious bunch of secession movements and or a civil war. And if there is a new flag, they'll definitely put green and black in the new flag to show how politically correct they are.
What do those colors represent?
Well, let me see. Green is the environment, and black is
People of color.
people of color.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, it's one of the oldest rules of post-war investing or post-World War II investing is that it's never invest in a country that has green in its flag.
Really?
And it's actually a pretty good rule.
Holy cow! I never heard
And I
that.
guess that goes for black in the flag too. Although Germany has black as one of the Germans' colors, but it's the only country out of Africa that has black in its flag.
Interesting.
Yeah, we could do that. The Americans could do that easily.
In the meantime, if you want to make sure, like the best way to make sure, I think that you're actually talking to a, it's going to come a time where very soon where it's really dangerous to say things that, around certain groups of people, and because you could get yourself in trouble. And I think it's not just like impolite conversation. I think it's like, it could be dangerous soon. And the funny thing is, for a little while at least, having the flag on your, represented in some form on your body will be like this sign to tell somebody, yeah, we're on the same team, like signal to each other that you're, which side of the battlefront you're on, in a way, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Strangely
that's
enough,
right. But then it's gonna, evolve so that the enemy forces know that if you have that flag, you're not just a patriot. You're probably a
insurrectionist.
rebel or a Trump supporter or something.
Yep.
Yes, an insurrectionist, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You won't have long, but I think
I don't see how this thing, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think there'll be a few month period though, where I never imagined I'd do this. I might have a little flag lapel pin. I mean, it's quite possible that I could for a few months just to try and signal to people that I'm more inclined to their side.
Yeah, that's right. I've come to dislike those flag lapel pins because that's what the political class in Washington, D.C. wears. And I'd come to despise it as a symbol. But, it's similar in a way to the fact that for many years, I didn't really say Merry Christmas to people. I would wish them a joyous winter solstice or a raucous Saturnalia, which of course are the two historical events that the Christians assumed when they put Christmas at the time when they did. But subsequently, since everybody's saying season's greetings and happy holidays, I actually have gone back to saying Merry Christmas again. I mean, it's funny how these winds blow.
Being a contrarian keeps you on your toes, Doug. You can't just stick with one position long. You have to be alert and move it.
I know. I'm just not looking forward to it getting out of control and violent, because it's not just going to be unpleasant, it's going to be inconvenient. And of course, already the world has become rather globalized, with the jet plane making it easy for anybody to get anywhere over the last 50 years. But now that's going to go into reverse. The fact that there are a lot less jet planes flying now, and I think that's going to be the case for years to come, number one. But with this COVID hysteria, and now I'm sure COVID passports are on the way. And of course, the next step is you have to be chipped for COVID. But then once you're chipped, I mean, that chip can be used for lots of things besides seeing if you're up to date on your COVID vaccine. It's so the world is going to get smaller. It was getting bigger. I think it's going to start getting smaller now. And notwithstanding what the Schwabis and other World Economic Forum people want to do, I think the world in general is going to become now more nationalistic. The European Union is going to break up for sure, and the United States is going to break up. A bunch of countries are. Now, this is going to be a chaotic time. It could be like the 1920s and 30s in China, for instance, a good recent analogy, or perhaps the 1980s or 90s in Yugoslavia.
Mm. Yeah, it's going to be chaotic. I think there's no way to avoid it. It seems like escalation is the only thing that can happen from here. And I think fundamentally, when you have groups of people who are totally talking at each other and nothing is heard, and I'm not talking about, left and right. I think this transcends all of that. I think people who assume that the government or the state is on their side, it changes from time to time. You see like the right was sure that with Trump in charge, that the state was somehow on their side and would protect their liberties and their interests. And then, the left, has sees the state that way now. It's kind of a convenient relationships. They delude themselves into thinking that the state is on their side, but ultimately it's the state, and then there's the people, and that's where the conflict is.
That's right, and it's like a meme circulating with the Proud Boys, and I don't keep up with them, frankly, because I don't much of what's happening, but I do know that the cops were on their side and they were on the cops' side are now saying, hey, we had your back before.
Yep.
Speaking to the cops, but we don't anymore. And it's like masses of people are even though Fox has some people for what is it, AON?
Yes, AON.
The network
OAN.
I'm talking.
Oh, yeah, it's OAN.
OAN, right. Right. I watched it, and it's kind of a low rent Fox. They're the girls, well, they're like a step up from the trailer park, really, to tell you the truth. They're not as good looking. They don't talk as well as the Fox honeys do. Well, it's true of the whole thing, but they're all going there, I guess, because they just hate, justifiably, corporate America. And Fox is part of corporate America, even though it has, a few right-wing hosts.
Exactly. Yeah, and the media is certainly not helping any of this that's happening in the world right now. Sorry, Doug, I'm trying to turn your video back on, and I accidentally muted you. So if you can unmute and turn your video on, that would be great.
Okay.
Just trying
We're
to.
really having technical problems today, aren't we?
Yeah, it's coming in and out. So when I turn on the video, though, that does really help. It certainly does help increase the bandwidth. But yeah, I'm not sure what it is today. My end tested pretty positive, but in any case, so it seems to me it escalates from here no matter what, because of the fact that you have the government trying to send a message to the people. Stimulus bill is an example. Like, we don't really care about you. You're sort of irrelevant. And the people don't really, mostly it seems like they're still not hearing that. They don't really get the message yet. And then the people go to the Capitol to protest, and the response from it is how deeply irresponsible those bad behaving children were, and how much, how much the conservatives tell them how badly they set back their cause. Oh, that's what the conservative talking point is. It's you bad people who support us and vote us in. Because you were bad at the Capitol, you set back the conservative cause completely. And now that they have full control of the government, like we're all going to pay the price. And so they're just, no one is really empathizing with the side of the people who basically have, they've been through the ringer, and it's not going to end, and they know it's not going to end, and so that's why they were there protesting to begin with.
Well, one lesson that I don't know if they're going to be bright enough to figure this out, but perhaps people are going to figure out that the government and the country are two separate entities. I mean, the US government has a life of its own. It's a separate entity, as separate as with its own interests as General Motors is from the rest of the country. So it shouldn't be put on a pedestal and respected, especially since absolutely the worst kind of people go to Washington and join the government. So maybe that's going to finally sink in to the average American in flyover country.
I hope so. I hope the two big lessons from this, honestly, that people take away from it is that, one, it's going to escalate, so be prepared, and stay out of the fray. Like, I just don't. There's very little to be gained. Actually, probably nothing to be gained by making yourself a visible target and really, and stepping into the fray. I just think it's I don't blame any of the people yesterday for being part of what they were part of. They believed that their voices mattered. They believed that in America was a democracy. They believed that the election had been stolen. They believed that going and protesting was the right thing to do, and so that's what got them there. Now, when you get big crowds, things go out of control. That always happens when you have big crowds, which is why you should always avoid them, because even you can be swept up and behave in a way you never imagined you would, because the psychological impact of the herd mentality it really messes with you. So can't blame those people for being there, and the situation. Totally understandable, and yet avoid that, I think, at all costs if you can. Just stay away from it. It just is not going to help you. It's not going to help. You don't get.
And there are going to be plenty of opportunities to put that advice into practice to avoid getting swept up, not just the rest of this year, but in the years to come. I'm convinced of it. And who knows what kind of laws are going to be passed about domestic terrorism? That's going to be ugly, where people that are not part of the in crowd are. No, this could get very ugly. It's logical. It's likely that these people are going to pass these laws, and you're going to be clamped down on if you're. Wow.
Yeah,
I see why during the war between the states, Rhett Butler left for England during the first part of it.
Yep.
That was a part of Gone with the Wind.
You can also understand why H.L. Mencken, when the wars got nuts, he just quieted down. He went into a quiet period, and he's quite a critic of everything, and had a voice that seemed to cut through the noise. But during certain periods, he shut up. He shut up, and I think it's just as
he knew people would not listen, and he just didn't want to be torn limb from limb by the chimpanzees.
Right.
So
I think you got to be very aware of that. That's coming, and I think one of the other thing that is certainly coming is that the economic realities, and we talked about this a little offline with Paul yesterday. The economic realities, despite this political theater and the real violence and conflict we see between different factions politically, like that's all the energy gets drawn there. But the economic realities of all of the decisions that have been made over the last decades, but especially coming to a head in the last year, cannot be avoided. The consequences of that cannot be avoided. Those are coming. And, it's while we're distracted by the political theater, it's really important, I think, that people focus on the economic side of it, because that's going to hit like a tsunami. And when it does, it's going to be devastating, and it's going to exacerbate all the other problems, because the desperation level is going to skyrocket. And I just think people have to be focused on that. And so with that, Doug, what's the one thing that people should be looking on? What's the economic early indicator, I guess, that we're almost out of time? Is there something that they can see, a number?
Yeah, well, recognizing that the chickens are coming home to roost, except they're the size of the pteranodons in Jurassic Park.
Exactly.
What's an early indicator of what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's like bond.
Well, listen, we're already in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know how long the government can keep interest rates at these artificial levels. I mean, in Denmark, which kind of led the race to the bottom on interest rates, you can get a long-term mortgage in Denmark for 0%. And actually, that's clinically insane on the part of the lender. But it's possible, I guess, with the Danish central bank. So listen, there's an old joke, one of my favorite jokes about predicting interest rates. Do you know the one I'm talking about, Einstein?
Yes, it goes to heaven, right? Is that one?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll tell this joke because a lot of people may not have heard it. So Einstein dies, goes to heaven. St. Peter greets him, says, "Oh, we're so happy to see you, Mr. Einstein. But unfortunately, since heaven is a centrally planned economy for obvious reasons, we have a temporary housing shortage." So Einstein says, "No problem, no problem." St. Peter says, "Well, you'll have to bunk with 3 other guys for a while." Okay, great. So these guys are obviously overjoyed that Einstein's their roommate. And they come up and introduce themselves to him. First guy comes up to him and he says, "Mr. Einstein, I have an IQ of 130 and I'd like to get to know you better." Einstein says, "Great. After lunch, let's bounce around a few ideas on astrophysics that have been on my mind." Second guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm not as smart as that first guy. I've only got an IQ of 100, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein says, "Well, let me put away my grip and let's play a game of chess." Third guy comes up and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm not as smart as those 2 guys. I've only got an IQ of 70, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein says, "So where do you think interest rates are going?"
Yeah. Nobody
So
knows.
I don't want to predict interest rates.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
nobody knows. But I will predict the direction of the dollar, and the dollar is the dollar's well on its way to toilet paper now. That's going to be a real catastrophe for America. And
so.
that's why I'm
So it's
thinking I
important we
can
notice
get a 80% mortgage at 3% interest for 30 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, interest rates are crazy. I told you about the car that I felt like an idiot if I did not take their the loan on it. I mean, I've never had a loan on a car in my not since maybe I was my early 20s, but I actually bought a car not long ago and I took the loan because it was 1% interest rate over 5 years. And I thought, and it just felt so deeply foolish for me to use my actual money to buy that car. For the total cost of the financing of that over that entire period is just so inconsequential. It's crazy. And I never even would have thought about it before. And then I just, anyway, it seems crazy. And that's why, and interest rates they're so low, it makes sense to make some, to use it. I mean, but that's the trap though. They get you in, they try and convince you to use it, right?
Well, of course, and low interest rates, it seems like it's free, so it makes people overconsume. Hey, most people say, "Hey, I can't afford that, but I can afford, 1% interest rates." Yeah, so of course, this is how you got a crack up boom in the economy, especially when people see the dollar is going to lose value. So they just buy anything just to get out of dollars. And that's going to come in the United States. There's a good chance of it because of the low interest rate financing and the Federal Reserve trying to keep the economy going at any price. Yeah, that's going to be a disaster. That's early 1920s Germany. So
So what? So is it so any early indicator at all that kind of pops up? I'm just trying to think. I mean, maybe I think of things that are not maybe normal economic activity, but it does seem to me that there's a plan to introduce the central bank digital currencies, to alter the dollar system so that I would imagine that uh, at least the Fed hopes that they could be ahead of that severe crisis by issuing a new central bank digital currency, kind of having the pipes out there first, so that they can. They're not that they're that smart or that they could really make it happen in time. I don't know, but I do think that once that comes out, there will be the incentives for trying to keep it together will go down the dollar system because I think they want to switch over to a new system anyway. They feel like they need.
Well, look, I'm acting as if whatever the signal actually turns out to be, that it's already been given. So everything I'm doing is preparing for this disaster. And people that rely on the Federal Reserve at this point to fine tune the economy, a ridiculous concept to start with, but they actually used to promote it because these fools thought they could fine tune the economy. They're walking a tightrope above Niagara Falls, but they don't know what they're doing. It's like having a drunk stumble bum walking the tightrope. It's a guaranteed disaster. So no, I'm not waiting for the signal. I'm acting now to beat the last minute rush. Because when the last minute rush comes, it's going to be kind of too late.
Okay. And by doing that, you're saying, I'm sure you have plenty of cash on hand. And then you've got investments in gold, gold stocks, some Bitcoin, and I know you have a little interest in some oil stocks as well. But
and I've got some, some nice places to hang out, and bought lots of stuff to stock them up, so forth. So I'll be pretty good, everything else being equal. But that story about the guy that saw World War II coming and went to the Solomon Islands because it was so out of the middle of nowhere and lands on Guadalcanal. So you can run, but you can't hide, probably.
Yeah, maybe the U.S. will have
just play the odds.
The U.S. will have a proxy war with China and Punta del Este, Uruguay.
Yeah, that's kind of a long shot. So I'm willing to make that bet. Right.
Bet. I would too. So, okay. Well, good. Well, things are getting crazy. And I think that's it's not unexpected. And, as anytime you have these, we worried about the election because the election was a forcing function and it would cause like a time to coalesce around new events. We had no resolution with the election, so it was all kind of put off, and and that was put off really until yesterday. But now at that crisis point where people are having to deal with realities that Q's not going to save people, that Trump, that these however many thousand sealed indictments, if they exist, are still going to say sealed. That there's no one coming to save us. And so now people are going to start making decisions on a totally different frame of reference, I think. And who knows what next week looks like, let alone next month or next year.
Exactly. Because we're talking about probably 50 or 75 million Americans that are unhappy, or more than happy. A lot of them are really pissed off. So I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So, all right.
Oh, yeah.
We'll just have to follow my drill sergeant's advice that he gave us all young new recruits into the Army. It was stay alert, stay alive was his phrase. He made us repeat thousands of times. Stay alert, stay alive.
Yeah. Yeah. This isn't a good time to fall asleep at the switch, as it were.
It's certainly not. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. And tomorrow we have a Q&A. So I'm looking forward to that. We got a bunch of questions. If you have questions that you would like Doug and I to respond to, leave them in the comments below, and we will attempt to get to as many as we can tomorrow. So thank you very much, Doug.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.